busiest time of year. It's a very busy time. We're a little low on turkey, shameless plug. And also much of our work is focused on housing response and homelessness response in the community.
And I'm Catherine Dimitrick, Executive Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission. We're a governmental organization that serves Franklin and Grand Isle counties. One of our main focuses is to build capacity for local governments and help them do a lot of the work in areas of importance to local communities. Additionally, we do regional projects focused on transportation, brownfields, redevelopment, land use planning, and housing is one of the issues that we tackle as well.
Barry asked us to speak tonight a little bit about why this is such an important topic, and I'm here tonight because housing matters. Housing matters the same way food, water, and clothing matter. Housing matters the same way that roads, cars, and electricity matter. Housing is a basic human need. Housing matters to young people who want to stay in their communities, in homes close to friends and family. Housing matters for business owners who are not able to hire needed staff because prospective employees cannot find a place to live in the area. With over 25,000 jobs vacant in the state and only 7,000 Vermonters looking for employment, housing matters for those willing and wanting to move to the beautiful state of Vermont. It matters for the small business owner who can only pay staff minimum wage, which is not live in or maintain their homes or afford them with fixed incomes. And housing matters to the 222 households, 350 individuals that had to access emergency shelter programs in our county in the last year. Housing matters because a house is not just a home, it is the building block of a community. I was born and raised in Franklin County, and I live here now with my 2 children. I want to live in a vibrant, thriving, welcoming community, and available, affordable housing is the first step we take towards that vision.
There's a rap artist named Earl Sweatshirt that some of you may have heard of, and he has a song in which he quotes a poem from his father, who was the poet laureate of South Africa. And that poem is about refugees, but it ends with a statement that resonates so much in every part of our lives when we think about housing. And it ends with, to have a home is not a favor. So to have a home is not a favor. And I think about that a lot when I think about the work we're doing in housing, because housing is hard. It's a big problem that has lots of different aspects that make it difficult to solve. And every solution seems to have somebody who doesn't like that particular solution. So it's really hard, it's really complicated. And that's why I'm really excited about this conversation tonight, because I'm interested to hear the ideas that people have and how we're going to help solve this problem in Franklin and Grand Isle counties and in the state of Vermont. Because housing is hard, but we can do hard things. And if we remember that to have a home is not a favor, then we can work together to do those hard things and try to solve this problem. Tonight's agenda is behind us. We're going to spend a little bit of time setting the stage with some data and information from a recent housing needs analysis that's in its final stages of being complete. And then we're going to spend most of the time hearing from you and talking about your ideas to face these challenges that we have in housing.
Oh, it looks like they're muted again.
Not advancing. All right,
do this in around 10 minutes. So I'm going to go quickly, and I just want to know that if you want to see more of this data in more detail, it will be released for public viewing at some point in the future. So tonight I'm just giving a high-level overview, and housing is complicated and big, as Catherine noted, and so I can't touch on everything. So I'm going to give a high-level overview. So the Regional Planning Commission is currently preparing an update to our regional plan, covering the 8-year period, 2023 to 2031. So it's an 8-year plan cycle, looking at Franklin and Grand Isle counties. It will set a vision for the region. We're going to be developing key strategies on how to make the region a better place, and also to set priorities on how the RPC, the Regional Planning Commission, will allocate resources to the program areas that we work in. So the regional plan is a plan for the future of the region. We analyze data trends and set policy around a whole range of interlocking issues that communities face and that are important to the community. We look at public transportation planning. We look at access to childcare, protecting our natural resources, looking at adequate recreation opportunities in our communities and revitalizing our village centers, and ensuring we have strong, diverse economies, amongst many others, right? And then we're here tonight to talk about housing and ensuring everyone has housing. So the regional plan looks at all of these issues, but it's a plan of and by the people of the region, and it's also based on strong community outreach, so that's part of the plan. So tonight we're talking about housing. These are our draft regional housing goals. All current and future residents will have equitable access to safe, high-quality, safe, and affordable housing options. Can I do that?
Top left.
Oops, no, it went up. There we go. Housing is concentrated in regional and sub-regional growth areas and village centers that are convenient and accessible to existing or planned infrastructure, employment, services, retail, public transportation, recreation facilities, and schools. And finally, housing design and construction is energy efficient and minimizes adverse environmental impacts. So those are setting the stage for how the Regional Planning Commission is addressing housing. As part of this update and looking at adequate housing for the region, we embarked on a housing needs assessment. We hired a consultant, PlaceSense, to do this needs assessment, looking at population and housing trends. We asked the consultant to quantify regional housing needs and identify gaps and equities. And then also, we're looking at that data now and looking at how to reduce those unmet needs and improve equity. So I'm going to start to highlight an overview of some of the data trends that were presented in the needs assessment. So household growth. Overall, the region is growing at slower rates each year, and it is not distributed evenly across the towns in the region. We're seeing 45% of new households in St. Albans Town and Fairfax being desirable locations in the commuter shed of the Burlington area. And I just want to also note for Chip and St. Albans City that the census did count a loss of housing units there, but that could be impacted by a glitch with the count of the Maiden Lane housing project. So looking into the future, we looked at some household growth projections. We're going to continue to grow at slower rates. There's going to be continued need for senior housing as the boomer generation continues to age. But then you'll see by 2040, we start to have a recovery of younger households headed by younger individuals. Our housing stock is homogeneous. We have almost 80% of our housing stock as single unit. We have lower quantities of multi-unit housing, and including that 2 to 4 unit housing that we call missing middle. And we have some census data that is showing there could be a loss of housing diversity and a loss of those 2 to 4 unit housing. So that's a concerning trend we're looking at. but due to some of the limitations with the data, we want to explore that a little bit more, but it's a concerning trend. Household characteristics. Median age is continuing to rise as the boomer generation ages. I think in 2020, Franklin County crested 40 as a median age. Household size continues to decline. And this is a really striking trend. New households created from 2000 to 2020, over 80% were non-family households. And of those non-family households, almost 60% were single-person households. So looking at tenure, owning versus renting. Overall, the percentage of households in the renting households in the region, it's interesting to point out that it's lower than the Burlington MSA, Burlington Metropolitan Statistical Area, and the state, and that they're concentrated in St. Albans City town. That's not surprising. And then Ridgeford and St. Albans City have the highest percentages of renting households at 30% or more. When we're looking at income growth, median income growth, it's not felt evenly, right? So renter and non-family households did not experience the same growth that that homeowners experienced. Median incomes for homeowners were twice that of renting households during the period 2000 to 2020, according to the census. So looking at affordability, housing is considered affordable. This is a standard threshold that is used to measure affordability when a household spends no more than 30% of their income on housing. And so when a household spends more than 30%, we call that household cost burden. In the region, 1 in 3 households is spending more than 30% of their income on housing, according to 2020 data. So that's a point in time count and based on 2020 data. And we know that since then, housing costs are going like this. We have recent housing cost data, and they are spiking, as everyone knows. So, and homes are more unaffordable for renters. Looking at this chart, we have almost 50% of renters cost burden in the region. Cost burden is not felt evenly through different types of households. There's a disproportional impact on vulnerable and marginalized populations. This chart shows that, looking at single-person households, households headed by younger people, households headed by seniors, households with children, households with a disability, and households identifying as non-white. You can see here that over 50% of households identifying as non-white experience cost burden, while 30% of all households did. And that gets, the cost burden is greater for lower income families, and that disproportional impact is greater. Finally, we're looking at quantifying the unmet housing need. We're looking at, based on this analysis, there's 7,600 households in the region that currently have an unmet housing need. So that's looking at underhoused, those currently experiencing homelessness based on a point in time count. And then it's looking at underhoused for a variety of reasons. You're housed, but your needs are not being adequately met, whether it's because of the size of the unit, or you're living with family and you would rather not be, or your unit is not accessible, or the quality of the housing is low. So 7,600 households have an unmet need right now. That doesn't take into account the need to build more units for population growth. So right now, it's thinking about how are we going to account for that unmet need and catch up. So recommendations to better meet needs. And this is really where the work gets done, where the rubber hits the road. How do we better meet needs? And so some of the recommendations we have on the table right now that we're just starting to work on are we need more units, right? And so of those affordable units, we especially need those missing middle types that are affordable by design in our village centers and that will diversify our housing stock. We also need to expand programs and make housing more affordable through housing costs, subsidy, and through expanding household income, whether that be through workforce development programs. We also need to focus efforts on those experiencing disproportional impacts. Severely cost-burdened households, households currently living in substandard housing, BIPOC households. How am I doing on time? So that was a really quick overview of the really important data, and it's really helpful to set policy for housing in the region. So I'm going to highlight really quickly a few projects that are currently going on at the RBC looking at meeting housing needs. I'm going to talk quickly about the bylaw modernization program, and then I'm going to turn it over to Barry Lemke, the coordinator for the Housing for All Working Communities Challenge. So currently we have a bylaw modernization project looking at understanding and reducing regulatory barriers to housing at the local level. It's funded by a consortium bylaw modernization grant from the Department of Economic and Community Development to St. Albans Town as the lead applicant, and then Highgate, Sheldon, Montgomery, and Enosburg are participating. We're communicating and using the housing needs assessment. We're doing zoning audits to look at how tweaks in their regulations could allow for new opportunities for housing. We're educated and engaging with the communities around how housing can be infilled without integrated into their existing neighborhoods. And then finally, we're developing zoning regulation amendments to allow for new housing opportunities in a way that's responding to each community's unique context and need. I'd like to point out that municipal zoning is, when I'm talking about the bylaw modernization, municipal zoning is just one piece of the puzzle. This is a response to a survey completed by ACCD on barriers to housing. You know, in addition to zoning, we have many other challenges accessing housing, as I think everyone here understands, but from high construction costs to wastewater infrastructure to permitting. There's a variety of other pieces to that large puzzle in terms of how to solve the housing crisis. And when we're looking at tweaks and looking to add more housing to our existing neighborhoods, we're looking at these missing middle housing types that are affordable by design. The accessory dwelling units, the duplexes, the row homes, the cottage courts, triplexes, fourplexes, as examples that are walkable, accessible to services and employment. They're efficient uses of land, and they fit into the context of the neighborhood at the right scale. This is just a quick slide to sort of show visually that slight tweaks to zoning, whether it's setbacks or frontage or the type and amount of development that can happen on a lot, gentle infill can happen to our streets in a way that fits in with the context of each community's neighborhood. Zoning for more housing can be gentle. For more information, Enabling Better Places I have to reference this. You can search this on the Agency for Community Commerce and Community Development's website, a zoning guide for Vermont neighborhoods, a lot of detail on the types of zoning changes that can impact housing choice. And finally, if you wanted to follow our project and the work we're doing with the communities in the Northwest region, you can find this website at nrpcvt.com under housing programs, and we'll be continuing to update that. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Barry Lemke, the coordinator of the Housing for All Working Communities Challenge project. Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. A word about the housing needs assessment. As Greta said, we rushed through a lot of information there, so we will be sharing that information in various ways with people. If you're interested in learning more, getting a copy of the housing needs assessment, we will have that. It is almost complete. And it's also going to be available in what's called a story map, which is an interactive kind of online piece for to be able to look at that information in different ways. So we're happy to share that with anybody who's interested. And just a word also about the housing needs assessment. One of the things it doesn't capture is what's happened in the last 2 years as a result of inflation and COVID. And as we know, what was a chronic problem in the past around housing has become a crisis. And so the housing needs assessment captures what it can about that, but one of the ways that we really want to be able to capture what has happened in the past years is to gather stories about people's experiences about how housing has been a challenge, and what opportunities have been created when somebody is given a home and how their life has changed. So I urge you please to connect with me, to share those stories, and we like to share those with the rest of the community so that everybody understands that when everybody has a home, our communities are stronger. So I'm going to tell you about Housing for All, the Working Communities Challenge. We formed, the work has been going on for a few years, but we formed based around a grant that we just received. And our mission is supporting the creation and improvement of housing for healthy, inclusive, and prosperous communities. So our goals are to spread the knowledge of the region's housing needs. That's part of why we're here tonight, is to kind of bring everybody both the data and the stories of what's going on around the housing crisis that's happening right now. We want to ensure that people have access to a safe home. We want to sustain and improve existing homes. So we're not going to, as everybody says, build our way out of this. Right now, everybody understands that construction of a new buildings is expensive. So we're looking at how we improve existing homes. We want to make it easier also to build homes. And there's a number of ways to do that. And building for prosperous and healthy communities. So building homes in the right places where people can thrive. So as I said, we're part of the Working Communities Challenge. This is a program that was created by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Many of us know the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston because they set the interest rate. Everybody pays attention to the interest rate. This has nothing to do with that side of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. This is what's called the community development side. How do they help communities thrive? The Working Communities Challenge is about strengthening New England economies and communities by sparking change in smaller cities and rural areas. So that's how we fit in. We're one of a number of projects in Vermont, as you can see from around the state. The projects represent about 60% of the population of the state of Vermont. And it really is kind of a multi-sector, ground-up way of tackling our community's biggest challenges. On our core team, we have a wide variety of organizations that are in our community, from the Champlain Housing Trust and Community College of Vermont, Northwestern Medical Center, a mix of public and private folks that are involved in housing. So we're focusing on system change. Pick any sector: education, healthcare, housing. All of these systems are broken. This is yet another system that is broken. They are all interlinked, and we understand that to really get to the root of the causes of the problems that we have around housing, we need to focus on system change. And all of the Working Communities Challenge projects are focusing on system change. So part of that work on system change is our work here tonight. This is the first of a number of community conversations we want to have around creating and improving housing for everyone in the region. We want to hear from you and your thoughts about how to do that. And we hope to have the work that's done tonight inform a series of strategy sessions, public as well as stakeholder organizations, early next year. We want to share what we heard from people as part of this community conversation. We want to align it with the goals and activities that are underway now. And we want to establish some strategies and opportunities to pilot some things to see how we can begin the work of system change. So understanding that we're not going to change the system in the short term, we have pulled together a group of people, and again, this group here tonight, to focus on what can we do to help now in the short term, understanding that for many people, they do not have a home tonight, so we want to be able to focus on very short-term opportunities, and we want to focus on the medium term. What can we do with a little bit of resource, a little bit of money, some research, connecting people together to create change in the medium term and then long term? How do we lay the groundwork for this critical path to do the long work of systems change? So we, a couple of weeks ago, hosted a workshop in creating an apartment in your home. They're called accessory dwelling units. So it's creating an apartment either within your home or on your property. It's something that in many cases can be somewhat complex. There's municipal zoning regulations, there's financing, there's construction and design. So there's a lot that goes into what could be, what many people might think is a simple thing, to create an apartment in your home or on your property. So we brought together some experts to share an overview of what are the major moving pieces that you need to think about when you want to create an apartment in your home. And creating an apartment in your home or on your property can be a very flexible solution to help gain income. If you're having trouble paying your bills, you might be able to help make your mortgage by creating a home and renting it out to somebody. Or it's also flexible enough to be able to have relatives or friends who may need a place to stay. So we hosted that workshop. It was a Zoom workshop online, and we have the recording for that, so happy to make that available, and it's going to be on our website. The other thing we're looking at is creating local housing committees. These are groups of people that are interested in learning how they can improve and create housing in their communities. In some cases, they are part of municipal government. In some cases, they are volunteers. Some of them focus on strictly affordable housing. Some of them get involved in projects that are coming to the municipality, housing developments, to ensure that there is affordable housing as part of those projects. So one of the things that we're looking at is cultivating the creation of local housing committees in communities here in Franklin and Grand Island counties. So if you know, if in your community, if you know people who are interested in possibly creating a housing committee, please get in touch with me. And we're also looking at supporting and training small developers, housing entrepreneurs, people who own property and who have home apartments now or are looking to create apartments in the properties they have. So how can we support the work that they're doing to help create more homes? So this is just the first step of asking people to get involved. We have a webpage at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission's website, nrpcvt.com. Read the housing needs assessment. As soon as it's done, we will post it there. We will be sharing it with folks around the community in different ways. Share your stories. We want to hear what your challenges, what you think has not worked, and what can work. What are your stories about having a home made a difference in helping you and your family thrive? Talk with town leaders and let them know that you think creating and improving housing in your community is important. And last, meet with your legislative representative. The new legislative session is going to be starting in January, and I'm sure there's going to be housing bills introduced, and so we'd love to have people from this community sharing your voice about why a safe and affordable home is important for you. So this is my email address. Feel free to talk to me here or email after. And now I'm going to introduce, actually I want to know if folks have questions about either the regional plan, again a lot of information, the bylaw modernization project, or the Working Communities Challenge. Happy to answer questions. And folks online, happy to, if you have questions, put them in the chat. And we have somebody here in the room who can read them. So any questions folks here have about the regional plan, bylaw modernization, or the Working Communities Challenge?
Isn't the option of building an apartment in your house or another accessory dwelling limited to those towns that have septic sewer systems? And because if you're adding a bedroom or an apartment, which of course would be adding probably more than one bedroom, you need to go back to the Department of Environmental Conservation for.
Yeah, certainly if there's
probably talking $20,000–$30,000.
Certainly if there's existing water and wastewater, that could make it easier. If you're in a rural area, you need to make sure that your septic system has the capacity to handle extra bedrooms. So what exactly is your question?
From a practical point of view, isn't that option only available in those towns that have a sewer system that you can hook into?
In rural areas, if you have a septic system and your septic system has the capability to handle the extra bedrooms, then that is possible in a rural area. You do not need to be connected to water and wastewater to have an apartment.
But Barry, most houses, the septic system is designed for the number of bedrooms in an existing house.
In the existing house?
Well,
Okay.
when the house was built, they had 3 bedrooms, and the septic system was in for 3 bedrooms.
Okay, so we're hearing that rural towns have the septic system designed for bedrooms in the home, in the primary residence. Chip?
It really depends, because oftentimes an accessory dwelling unit is a conversion of the existing home, and it is being assigned a bedroom that already exists. So many accessory dwelling unit conversions don't increase the number of bedrooms. They just take 1 or 2 that already exist and you partition off the house, and that's the accessory dwelling unit. It really depends on the situation. You do have to go to DEC for a water, wastewater permit every time technically that you do something like that, but it may or may not be a huge impediment.
had a request from the folks on Zoom that you just repeat
Okay,
the comments.
yeah. So Chip was saying that in many cases, creating an apartment happens within the home, and it's not changing the total number of bedrooms, so it would not necessarily be an obstacle. That's one point, and then, does that capture?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do have one question on Zoom from Matthew, who had asked, what's the timeline for this project?
So Matthew from the Zoom asks what's the timeline for the project. So we have a few different projects. So the regional plan that we spoke about is in its draft form, and early next year we are bringing it to our Board of Commissioners for adoption. So that's the timeline. So if you have comments on the draft regional plan, that's the timeline for that. The bylaw modernization project, Greta, what's the timeline for that?
The end of 2023, so we're working through the next year.
So the end of 2023. And the goal is to come up with solutions that municipalities can use to encourage creation of homes.
Regulatory solutions.
Regulatory
specific
solutions.
to zoning
Yep.
changes.
Yeah. And then the Working Communities Challenge is a 3-year project that started in March of this year. Al?
To Greta's remarks, Greta, when you said 30% of your income going to housing, I know it covers for taxes and for insurance, things like that, but what about oil or fuel?
Utilities are included.
So Al is asking whether utilities are included in that 30% if somebody's spending more than 30% of their income on housing. You're asking if utilities are included in that?
Taxes,
Yes.
insurance, and utilities are
Tax,
included.
insurance, and utilities are included in that 30, in that.
So that's going to present another major problem for people in that oil prices have now jumped up to $5.40 per gallon.
Yeah, Al is noting that the price of oil has gone up dramatically, and that is affecting the affordability. Other questions, comments?
For transportation.
Greta, I know you don't have time to go through all of the data, but do you have data on the number of housing units that are being used by Airbnb and VRBO, those types of things? And the reason I ask is I was in Colorado speaking to a person who worked at the ski resort, and they were telling me that all of the affordable housing for the people who tried to live there was being taken up by Airbnb and VRBO, and if ours isn't now, we might want to get ahead of it.
So we
Yeah.
have a question about the number, does the housing needs assessment talk about the number of short-term rentals from VRBO and Airbnb?
We did consider that at the beginning of the analysis. The best source of data that we have for that in our region is AirDNA. There's a good access to that data on housingdata.org by VHFA. We didn't find that in our region there's a significant trend of the Airbnb homes occupying homes that are needed by year-round residents. Because we have a significant seasonal population, but it is something that we should take a look at, and it is impacted differently in different communities. So for example, Montgomery has a really skyrocketing rate of Airbnbs, and their situation around Airbnb homes is very different than experienced in most other towns in the region. So it's certainly a trend that we want to look at and understand on what solutions are available for communities that are concerned.
So Greta, for the people online, has said that based on the data we have, the housing needs assessment in and of itself does not quantify the short-term rentals, the number of short-term rentals. But from the data available, it does not appear in our region to be taking homes away from people who are looking for a primary residence here in the region, but it is something that we need to keep an eye on. Other questions, comments?
So I'm a realtor, and I see a lot of, in the rural areas, a lot of deferred maintenance that over the years has caused so much damage that now the property is distressed. Will there be anything in the program that could help homeowners that are having this problem with affordability of housing? It's, do I fix my house or put food on the table? Is there something in there that could help those homeowners that they could apply for assistance?
So the question was about deferred maintenance in existing homes, and are there programs to help people fix those issues? So I can say that there are some programs. There's the Vermont Home Improvement Program which does provide money to improve residences. Those actually have to be off the market for 90 days. So if somebody's living in them now, then it would not. But there are existing programs, I think, through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency and other places to help people. I know that there's been emergency assistance from the federal government through the state government, but I don't know whether that is continuing, whether that's been used up or not. Does anybody have information about the availability of funds for deferred maintenance for existing homes?
Last
Jeff?
I checked, we have did.
What?
Last time I checked, which was a few weeks ago, VHAP still is issuing funding. And
VHAP.
Champlain Housing Trust has also grants.
Yeah, so the
and-
Champlain Housing
and
Trust
loans.
has grants, and what does VHAP stand for? Vermont Home Assistance Program.
Yeah, okay. That sounds
I know
good.
that acronym.
Homeowner assistance program.
Homeowner assistance, yeah. So there are resources. Yeah.
Which can be accessed through Champlain Housing Trust.
Champlain Housing Trust is the place to check those out. Other questions?
All right, so I have one from Darcy M. and they asked, if you're willing to build an apartment into your home or on your property, is there a grant to pay for it or a percentage, and how are people matched to live there?
So the question is, are there grants to create accessory dwelling units, apartments? So the Vermont Home Improvement Program does have a grant program for creation of accessory dwelling units. In order to qualify, the accessory dwelling unit needs to house a person who is exiting homelessness as part of the Continuum of Care program, which is coordinated by Franklin Grand Isle Community Action. So the money is available, it's coordinated through the Champlain Housing Trust. And then once it is built, then the tenants are coordinated through Franklin Grand Isle Community Action. But other than that, there are not grant programs to create. And to be fair, the financing to create an accessory dwelling unit is challenging because traditional financing and a mortgage often is not accessible. So often the people that are able to build accessory dwelling units are using home equity loans. So people with equity in their properties. So it's definitely something that's an obstacle to creating homes, and folks know that. So I know that there are some people in other projects like ours around the state that understand that there are people, often seniors, or folks with a limited income who are having trouble paying their bills, who own a home and having trouble paying their bills, and one of the ways that they can help pay their bills is by creating an apartment. So the question is, how do we give those resources to the people who own their own homes, who are having trouble paying their bills, and create a home for somebody else?
One from Zoom, Matthew asked what the deadline was to apply for these projects. I'm not sure if he's referring to.
Well, particularly for the Vermont Home Improvement Program, they have a series of rolling deadlines. So you'd have to go to the Champlain Housing Trust to see the next upcoming deadline. But they are competitive, and the money does go quickly.
Barry, have you heard from, I guess this is for everyone involved here, have you heard the comment that there are less homeowners willing to rent their homes out because of the behaviors of renters, as in trashing units and that sort of thing?
I mean, there's anecdotal, stories about people who have made the choice not to rent their homes because they're afraid of who might be living there. I think that it can be a cycle that if homes are not in good condition, if landlords are not keeping their properties in good condition, then that creates conditions that can make people unhappy, and bad behaviors can result. I think by and large we can agree that if people are in a safe and healthy home, then they're happier and not as likely to be engaging in bad behavior. Other questions? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I have a question.
Sorry?
Sorry.
Jessica?
I don't know. I was curious about cooperative housing and if there are resources. So if there's someone who's interested in creating a cooperative, do we have resources either through CDOEO or through the Champlain Housing Trust, like that they could go and chat with someone or develop those ideas?
So the question is about other resources for cooperative housing. I do know one form of cooperative housing is home share. And so it's somebody who lives in a home and would benefit from having somebody living in the home with them, often a senior, person with a disability who could rent out part of their home. So I know home sharing is one way, and there are organizations that do that kind of matching. I'm not sure about cooperative housing and creating cooperative housing for home ownership. Anybody know?
Champlain Housing Trust has a couple of cooperative projects in their portfolio, but they are in Chittenden County. I'm not sure.
So the question was around resources for cooperative housing, and Champlain Housing Trust has some resources in Chittenden County. Not sure if they're available here. Yeah.
I believe that cooperative housing will be of a great benefit here in Franklin County, in St. Albans City and both St. Albans Town. So I believe that is something that should really be explored and have data to back up whatever the situation is right now.
Great. The response was that cooperative housing would be a great solution here in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, particularly here in St. Albans City. Anyone else? Again, after the meeting, feel free to touch base with myself or Greta to learn more about the work we've talked about. I'm going to introduce Jessica Savage from the Vermont Council on Rural Development. The Vermont Council on Rural Development is helping provide resources and connections between projects like ours in other parts of the state. Jessica?
Hi, everybody. How's it going? Alyssa, can you guys hear me okay if I stand here? I don't want to block us.
Just giving you a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay, great. So we're a bit of a smaller crowd tonight, which is awesome because what we're going to do after this is we're going to get a little closer together and we're going to have a chance to hear from one another those great ideas about what your thoughts are around housing in the Northwest region. So like Barry said, I'm Jessica Savage. I'm the Director of Community Collaboration with the Vermont Council on Rural Development. We convene community conversations all across the state. Lately, I've been doing a lot of conversations around the state about housing and what communities are thinking about what they want to do for housing. Because I think everybody realizes there's something going on with housing right now, whether it's our existing housing stock or needing new housing stock, right? So what we're going to do right now is we're going to have two groups, basically. We're going to have the group in the room and the group on the Zoom, okay? So once I'm done talking, we'll mute ourselves so the people on Zoom don't have to listen to us chitter-chat over here. And then we'll pull our chairs closer together, and I'm going to pass around pens, if you don't have a pen, and a piece of paper, a little form, okay? The folks on Zoom, you're going to have a Google Doc that Alyssa is going to put in the chat. So same thing, you guys are going to have the same form just on your computer or in your hands here in the room. And we're going to take about 5 minutes and have you just write down your thoughts. And we want to hear from you about what are the challenges and gaps, what are the needs around housing in the Northwest region of the state. And then we want to hear about the bright spots, opportunities, things that are really giving you hope around housing. And then, of course, what do you want to do about it? What does the Northwest region of Vermont want to do about housing, given those opportunities and challenges? What are some actions that we could take? Okay? After you've had about 5 minutes to write, which I know the introverts in the room are like, thank God I get a minute to write. Everybody else, you'll love the next part where you're going to turn to a neighbor in the room. On Zoom, you're going to be put into small breakout groups of about 3 people. And you'll kind of reflect on what you wrote down and talk to one another and share a little bit about what you're noticing, actions, challenges, opportunities, things like that. And then we'll come back together as this group in the room and the group on Zoom, and we'll have a discussion about, you know, what really shone through for you, and what are some things that you want to make sure that these wonderful organizers hear from you about priority actions that should be taken and opportunities to make sure they don't miss. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so while I get ready to pass this out, Alyssa, are you guys all set on the Zoom?
Yep, she's giving you a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay, so the one thing about the Zoom, folks, and Alyssa will let you know this, I'm sure, don't hit submit on the form because then all your lovely writing will disappear. So wait till the very end to submit your form on Zoom, and Alyssa, I'm sure, will remind you several times. Okay, can somebody tell me how to turn off the sound here? And then do folks mind kind of coming closer together? And we could do that just by, if there's like gaps in chairs here, so if you just get, fill the gap. Starting right here, fill the gap. Just get in the chair, bring the chairs closer together. Perfect, you guys are doing really well. If you tell a group of people to make a circle, this is, I don't know, it's like an amoeba. It looks pretty good, I don't know.
Organic.
It's organic, yes, it's more like, you know, the shore of Lake Champlain in St. Albans Bay. Okay, so I'm gonna hand pens here. Why don't you take, will you take the container and just pass it? Take one and pass it. And then you want to pass these? Sure. Okay. We got pens coming this way, forms going that way.
There you go, Al.
And if you're really frustrated by trying to write on your lap, you can take another chair as a desk, or there are tables around the room. These 5 minutes are for you, so that's a good idea. Instead of writing on a piece of pizza. Your phone. On your phone. I've done that. Yeah, there you go. All right, forms are going around. And Barry, I feel like we're a small enough crowd. Do we want to, when we start talking, do we want to introduce? Or do we want to start with some names first? Is it just one thing here?
Names would be good.
Yeah. Okay, so before you have your 5 minutes of independent writing time, would you mind kicking us off and just saying who you are and maybe what town you're from?
I am Miroslav Trevsky, and I live in St. Albans town.
My name is Wendy Wilkinson, St. Albans Town.
I'm Jessica Moore, and I live in St. Albans City.
Good name. That's my name.
Chip Sawyer, St. Albans City.
Albo Gel, St. Albans Town.
Joe Helko, and I work in St. Albans.
Patricia Boyce, St. Albans City.
Timothy Horgan, and I grew up in St. Albans City, and I live in Fairfield now.
Liz Gamache, and I live in St. Albans City.
Kirk Waite from Georgia.
Barry Cade, Montgomery.
Jessica Fletcher.
Amanda Headley, Town, the Bay.
Huff, I work with the Regional Planning Commission, and I live in St. Albans City.
And Barry Lanky, I'm the project manager for Housing for All.
Okay, so I'm going to keep track of time here, and you have about 5 minutes to try to fill out this form and gather. Okay, I'm seeing mostly still pens. We feel good? You can catch up later, I promise. If you have, and if you hear things and you want to make sure you write them down or you forget, then take your time. We're going to keep this with you until the end, okay? So what we're going to do right now is we'd love to do a little pair share. So turn to somebody next to you. If it's somebody you know, great. If it's somebody you don't know, or you want to talk to somebody else in the room, that's fine. But hopefully you can just turn to the person next to you. And what we're going to do is just reflect on, you know, what you wrote down and talk with one another. So make sure you give space to the other person. So you have about 10 minutes for this, so about 5 minutes each. And leave it up to you how you want to do it. If you want to go question by question or do the whole shebang and then switch, whatever makes sense to you. Okay? Does everybody have a partner? If not, we got plenty of people here.
This is good.
How are we feeling? Did we get through all
You're like,
our
yeah, right.
questions?
There needs to be more recognition.
How are we feeling?
Ready for the revolution.
Ready for the revolution? Love it. Housing is a revolutionary act. Okay. Did you everybody share your time and share your thoughts? You didn't get to hear Jess's thoughts?
That's fine.
Yeah. Oh, she'll give you this one. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk all together, kind of about the same thing. Maybe what did you hear? What inspired you about what your partner said? Something that really sparked in you. Really focusing on especially action and opportunity here. But of course, if there's a particular challenge you want to make sure to highlight, that's okay too. But I would invite you to follow that up with like, what could the Northwest region in Vermont do about that challenge? Would anybody brave enough to start? Yes?
So I'll start off. My partner and I talked about many things, but the thing that came through to me was, this is not a simple solution. There are so many parts to it that are moving. And we have to get the developers, the people who build in the construction industry, landowners, the government, federal government, state government, and local governments, all participating just to set up the system by which we move housing forward. And this is the beginning. I mean, a meeting like this today is part of that, since we represent different municipalities. But it's not a matter of just putting up a house anymore. And particularly at a large scale, a lot of people are involved. How to get them to move quickly is another major issue. That's why I said the revolution.
Sure. Yeah, interesting. Sorry, I meant to ask for this. Is somebody willing to maybe take a couple of notes on what folks say and report out to our friends on Zoom? Anyone willing to be the reporter-outer for this group? If not, we'll get Barry or Emily or Jessica. Okay. All right, so they'll be your reporters, so they're going to take some notes on what you're saying and they'll report it. Okay, so it's a complex system, need a lot of people. How do you make it move fast? Anyone else? What are your thoughts? Opportunities, actions. What do you want the Northwest to do about housing?
We talked about needs and how they can be different for different generations. So from younger folks who are starting out in their career life, finding affordable housing is challenging, whether it's rental or home ownership. And then thinking about on the other end of the scale, as folks become older, how few senior housing options there are and how expensive they can be. And also the expensive housing can really diminish quickly the resources that people have built up over a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
Sorry.
ahead, Joe.
We had also talked about the fact that years ago, seniors would be able to buy down. And then that home would be available to Liz's point for a younger family to come in that, was larger. That doesn't seem to be available right now. So the senior is not able to buy down because those particular homes are already taken. And we're in the kind of this conundrum. I'm going to go off script a little here, but one of the other things we talked about, I don't know, I'm real adamant about this and maybe it could go nowhere, but because of what we've been through over the last 2.5 years, more and more people working remote, there are businesses that have figured out they don't need the same amount of space for their employees that they used to, because a certain percentage of their employees can work from home. So now they've got properties that have space that's empty. Is there a way that maybe those businesses are thinking about moving and downsizing to another building, but could those buildings that already exist be converted to housing units? So it would take some money, obviously, to convert them, but certainly not to the same degree as if you were starting from scratch. So you're using some existing infrastructure to transition it to housing.
And that could become, some of those could be these cooperative,
Yeah.
really great cooperative
Yeah.
environments.
What comes to mind is like USCIS building that flooded on Lower Weldon Street. That's no longer being used. It's a massive building.
We were just talking about that.
It's on Lower Weldon Street.
Lower Weldon, where INS was?
And Ellen?
It's completely big.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right from the
yeah.
park. And it's a
Yeah.
massive building. It was flooded.
Yeah.
Everybody owns
Yes.
it, and
Yeah.
it's just sitting there. In a great location, have the parking lot for apartments, have the park for families if
Sure.
needed. Like, it's a great developmental site, but then you have to go through regulations. She doesn't have the septic and all that other aspect that I don't know.
Right.
Because-
And that's where the bylaw modernization really has to be, that's such a big factor.
Yeah, so conversion of other commercial spaces or other spaces, changing existing buildings.
Well, there's also in rural communities, we were talking about this, there's a lot of housing that's distressed. And they're not interested in, they likely are not interested in putting the money in because the bylaws are going to require the infrastructure be new. But what if there was an incentive, or what if the committee that becomes of this decides that part of the grants or something is to find the right property to revitalize the ones that already exist? You're improving communities, you're improving what's already there, and you're not having to change the landscape that is Vermont.
Yeah, we talked about that too. We talked about where there are distressed properties that are not being bought by private developers for redevelopment. What other opportunities there might be for government or for someone else, nonprofit, to purchase those and redevelop, and potentially even a situation where they could turn a single family home into a duplex or something like that to add more units.
So
what you said?
what she raises in my mind is the whole issue of grandfather clauses for building construction. And the septic systems we talked about earlier, that anything built prior to 1970, if you change, you have to put in a whole new septic system, which are extremely costly. So maybe in terms of looking at regulations, we look for waivers to some of those rules that allow you to move forward without upgrading.
Or funding for.
Or
funding for.
Yeah, so trying to get those cost burdens of time, reduced for folks to rehab properties. Yeah. How about others? Yeah?
So Liz and I were briefly talking about subsidized housing, specifically Section 8, which neither are experts on, but Liz was talking about the rates in our region being based on the same rates as Chittenden County, which artificially drives up the rent cost for everyone in our region. Those that are subsidized and those that are not subsidized. And I'm not sure we know what to do about it, but clearly, someone who has a apartment in Richford probably doesn't have the same expenses, same cost as someone who has an apartment in Chittenden County.
So looking at, is there a change to the formula?
Right, change to the formula so that the people who are just out of reach of subsidy aren't priced out because they've been artificially driven up. The prices have been artificially driven up.
I mean, I think they're expecting for like a 2-bedroom in Franklin County that it would be almost between $1,700 and $1,800 a month.
Yep.
By 2023.
And that just
I just wanted to tell Kirk, he did such a great job of trying to explain that.
So you don't know a lot about it, but you did a good job explaining it. Okay, how about others? Yes.
Well, they raise another point. I have a niece who works for the federal government. And the federal government pays a subsidy to federal employees to where they live. Ironically, they pay more in Chittenden County than they do in Franklin County. So you've got a lot of crazy imbalances.
How about others? Are there other incentives or other ways that you could think about encouraging housing in different ways?
So I think one of the issues we have with seniors is the affordability for them to stay in their homes. And I think we have to do something about property tax in the state, recognizing that seniors have already paid 60 years worth of taxes. They've already put their kids through the school system. Why are they participating in funding the schools when they're on a fixed income?
Yeah, is there a suggestion there that you might
Yes,
have?
I think that we should have property tax relief for seniors.
But are other people that are not seniors willing to pay that extra sum?
It's already quite,
What's
we
that?
already have quite high taxes, so.
Yeah, but
I think,
I know several seniors who are getting out of their homes because they can't afford to stay in them.
That works on the coast of Maine, where you have the same situation where the property taxes skyrocket out here on the coast. So they do, it helps keep diversity in your communities because you don't want it to just, you want people who've been there for 50 years.
Did you want to say something? You were starting.
well, we started talking, or what was mentioned earlier about the short-term rentals. And I don't know this for fact, but I heard that there was a study that said Vermont was the #1 travel to location.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's not a big number, actually.
But
especially with the pandemic.
I know as a realtor, the percentage of people we have buying and moving here for second homes, third homes, or just moving here because they don't want air quality, that's not going to change. The desirability of New England is not going to change when everything's on fire out west and you're getting hit by a hurricane once a month in the south. So they're going to come here, and they're either going to come here and move entirely, or they're going to buy a second and third home to avoid those dangerous months. So if in those times they're using short-term rentals, I mean, Montgomery is trying, I think they're trying to put something in place to restrict the number of short-term rentals they have. Stowe says they don't have any restrictions, but it's just going to grow, and it's going to continue to grow. And there should be a different tax rate if that is how you are using your home. If you're buying a home and you're going to make 10, 20 grand a month off of a short-term rental in some locations, you can afford the higher taxes.
There is. The non-residential tax is typically higher than the homestead tax, and it should always be that.
Well, in St. Albans City, I looked at it today, and it was 1.6 for someone who owns the home and 1.8 if you don't own the home, if it wasn't your primary residence. But you don't want to intrude on developers who are not going to live in the home because we want them to build more housing. So but we also need to recognize there's a difference between someone living here for 5 months and someone generating 100 grand in 6 months in a short-term rental.
And also to add to what you're saying is that not all people that are living here part-time are from the U.S. There's a lot from Canada as well.
Agree. And we're not trying to say not to move here. We're just saying if you're going to generate a lot of income from the beauty of owning a home in Vermont, then that's something to consider for taxes. And that'll certainly help the elderly.
Did you want to say something?
I'm just wary of the costs of some of these solutions being borne by municipalities when this is a regional and statewide issue, especially for shire towns like the city, spilling out to the town.
Yeah.
We need the state to step up. If the state wants more housing, it needs to pay for the housing, and it's really expensive. And it's actually more expensive in the areas where they're trying to build more housing. You can't, if you dig a shovel full of dirt in the city of St. Albans, according to DEC, it's a substance that needs to go to a landfill because it's full of pollutants. It's everything about building in a historic community is more expensive. And we've had to engage in a lot of complicated partnerships to do the projects that we do. And we've shown you can do it, but you need a lot of support from the state. And this solution requires more than just housing. We need our police force to no longer be the primary mental health response for people in this community. That needs to stop. It's really, which only the property owners in the city of St. Albans are paying for, by the way. So it's crazy that there are not more state-funded mental health workers helping people in this community, helping landlords feel safe. There are landlords who do not feel safe to rent out their properties right now, and it should not be that way. And it's hypocritical to turn around and blame them for the problem when they build really nice units to code and they get trashed. And they end up having to pay the fines for the code violations. And they actually are scared to knock on the door when it's time to go in and replace the smoke detectors that keep getting smashed. It should not be that way. This is a lot more complicated than just the supply of housing. There's plenty of infill opportunity in the city. You wouldn't have to change the rules. It's ready to go. We need the money and we need the support. And it cannot just be each municipality on its own supporting everything that's associated with with increasing the density of people in our communities. It's not going to work.
I saw his hand and then we'll go over here. Did you want to say something?
Well, I mean, the state doesn't have printing presses for money either. So, I mean, if the state is, funding these, it's not just going to be in your community, it's going to be in all of them. And so state taxes go up, and so it doesn't really matter which pocket your money comes out of, Frankly, I don't see any solution to any of these problems under capitalism. The problem is housing is a commodity, and it goes to the highest bidder, and the highest bidder is the person who thinks they can make the most money off of it. And still, until we have some very significant changes in our economic system, and I don't know what they are, but to replace it with, other than to say something that's based on cooperation rather than the nastiest son of a bitch wins.
Here, so the action here, and I'm not joking, because this comes up a lot when in these conversations around systems change, especially when something is really complicated. It gets that deep sometimes, so I appreciate your comment. Yes?
And what you were saying about the infrastructure and the help with the police force, I was in Albans and I was speaking to this town fire chief, and he was saying that they don't have zoning, so they're influxing a lot of apartment buildings up there. But as an EMS, they don't actually have the capabilities to actually support the calls that are coming in. And so it's not just a housing market thing, it's all the services around that that need to be improved to create the new influx of population. We were talking about the education system, and the city has a lot of issues because they've just had a crazy increase of population, and they don't have the staff to support the new student body. So though we're increasing housing, we also need to work on education, infrastructure, housing, medical, all that is all related. And we're just talking about one of the issues in a huge problem we have. We have low accessibility to healthcare right now, especially in the rural areas. If we increase housing out there, that's still going to have a big issue finding doctors and dentists and all the other aspects that comes along with it. So it's nice that we're talking about housing, but within that, there's so much going on.
And right here in St. Albans City, we have the old courthouse by Federal and Kingman Street. From the time I moved here 20 years ago, I was like, gee, this place could be an awesome, like, mixed-use apartment place. And it was never done. Then the next thing you know, Kingman Street was revitalized, great job. And then this building is sold, and it's sold for $50,000. And then the city, that's what the information I got, the city is now helping to, with the environmentally challenged, whatever situation is happening there. Now, if this was something that we had got, for example, HUD or rural housing or other organizations that help with this kind of housing, then that could be more for the young people, but more for the senior citizens that don't need to have a car to drive there, you just walk, you do whatever, make it a walkable thing. So I believe that we should also look at other places other than St. Albans or even out of Vermont and see how they use their property with a similar situation. And me having family all over, I have family in the state of Georgia, and there's a place called Park Place. And every time I speak about it, is the similarity with St. Albans and Park Place. I go there to their meetings and I'm like, wow, it's about the same, the difference. But they come together and they have potlucks. Well, this is what's happening. How can we do it? And so it even grabbed the national attention where there's a documentary, and if you guys would like to check it out, about Park Place and how they changed their housing crisis and their minority crisis and school crisis into something that is looked upon now as an example on how you could move forward in using diversity and realizing that we all must coexist to exist in different aspects of housing, education, finance, and everything else. So I'm just saying that we need to think outside the box and also think about other places, do researches about other places with the same situation, how they're doing. Park Place is the perfect place. I think I told you this before, so you guys should look at that documentary and you would be surprised. You'd be like, when I was like, this is St. Albans, and the changes that they made.
So the lead is Park Place, Georgia?
Yep.
Okay.
In DeKalb County, yeah. Had a very bad reputation and now has a good reputation for housing, diversity, and everything else.
What's the name of the documentary? Do you give the name of it?
Oh, yeah, you did ask me. I had a
No, that's the name of the documentary?
Yeah, Park Place.
Park
Place.
Park Place.
It's in DeKalb, I'll pull it up right now, in DeKalb County, Georgia.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I did. I'm sorry I was just coughing. I don't have COVID or anything, but 3 weeks of this cough. Oh, my God. Okay. Great ideas so far. We've got about 5-ish minutes left, I think, before we bring the two, the virtual and the real life together again. What else? You guys have come up with some big ideas, so yes, sir.
I just came up with a germ of an idea,
Sure.
which is for affordable housing, or for primary residences, have a super homestead rate, similar to land use for farmland and forests. Where if a person signs up for the program, they get a significant discount on their property taxes, but it becomes a lien on the property just like land use does. And so if they sell it to somebody who's going to be using it as a seasonal dwelling or short-term rental, then they have to come up with, the money plus that they've saved plus the interest. Again, the state, as I said earlier, the state doesn't have printing presses, so I don't know how that could be covered. But we can do it for dairy cows. Why can't we do it for people?
And I feel like there's some of what you're saying happens through some of the affordable housing development already, but yeah, interesting. Yes, Chip.
Yeah, that kind of clause,
Yeah.
Since we're talking about property taxes, I don't think we should be giving anyone a property tax subsidy if they're not in the house they should be in. If they're not in the home that they should be in, which is tough, a tough judgment.
Yeah.
But we should be helping people who need to move to, who need to move to more minimal housing. We should be helping them move there rather than give them a subsidy to keep living in a place that perhaps another household could live in. And we need all kinds of housing. The more market rate housing we build, the more people that have crammed into housing that someone else could afford will go there because they can afford to go there and free up housing for those who can actually finally afford to be there.
It's not a closed system.
It's not a closed system. And I forgot the other. I think that with the changing, what's happening with especially a commercial space and the rise of remote work, especially if we're all going to have a real problem with what happens to the value of commercial space and what that's going to do to our tax revenues, if we have to keep lowering the property value of those spaces, then I think that we should be allowed to raise the property values of places where people are working remotely, because that's an unfair, uncaptured property value. We have to start lowering the values of our commercial spaces. And it's not a closed system. Where did that value go? These companies are saving money by having their workers work remotely. Well, whether it's the company that pays for it or the person who lives there, we should be able to tax that property higher if they're creating all that economic value in that location.
I'm a neutral facilitator, and I'm having a feeling in my body about that idea. Okay, so we have a few more minutes, and I would love to invite other ideas, but all ideas are welcome. You guys are at the wide end of the funnel, which is the fun part where you can think really creatively. Yes.
So I believe capitalism can work, and I think it's supply and demand, and I think we don't want to lower demand, so we need to focus on supply. I think that accessory dwellings are a significant area of supply if it was less expensive, less cumbersome, and you didn't have to change it back when your mom passed away. So in many towns, you know, they allow an accessory dwelling as long as someone in the family is living there. Well, what happens when mom dies? You're supposed to turn it back to just a single-family home again. So I think we need to put more effort into accessory dwelling units.
That's not, you can't do, a town can't do that to you.
No.
Yeah, state.
So I'm
I
a
think
couple
the
of
statute- I think the
Right.
statutory
Yeah.
language changed on that.
Fortunately, a town cannot tell you that. If it's, the only provision which can still be onerous is that the owner has to live in the house or the accessory dwelling. As long as the owner lives in one of the units, then your town still has to treat it as if it's just a single-family home.
So the latest case that would work for that I'm aware of, and that's where the owner is actually the one moving into the accessory dwelling.
Yep.
And
Perfect.
she
Yeah.
won't be long for the world.
Right.
So
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
it'll change back to a single family.
So the Zoom folks are ready for us, and I just, not that I don't want to hear from you, but there's a couple of folks we haven't heard from, and I just want to make sure if there are voices that.
She spoke for us.
She spoke. All right, so we'll take your last comment, and then we'll have a chance to report out among the two groups. Yes?
I just want to respond to Chip's thing about
My background is social work.
about housing and trying to move the elderly into smaller units.
Yep.
Being 82 and a widower, I could sell my home, but I won't because all my memories are there. And I think you have to, in some manner, recognize some of us, yeah, it's hard for me to maintain it, but nonetheless, I couldn't move into another apartment building and have that same sense of security with my wife. So I think that's a variable that one has to be aware of for people who are elderly and widowed.
You're not alone in that. The data shows that most people don't want to downsize. It's not just a matter of, is there available units? People want to age in place because that's the minimum.
And it's stressful.
Yep.
Downsizing, moving is incredibly stressful.
Home? What did you say? Home is not a fit. To have a home is not a fit. Well, I appreciate all of you. This has been a gift to hear your thoughts and insight, and I think we're going to open it back up to the two spaces.
You can send along, absolutely. Send it on to Barry and.
Barry's getting volunteered.
I'm going to just speak for a minute and say thank you. I think we're synthesized again. Thank you to Congress when we were wrapping up and we were crossing in space, so our universes have melded and hello it for some point in time. Thanks for everyone.
Okay. Okay, so I think we're fully merged, Alyssa, yes? Okay, you can see me, hi, and you can see them. You can keep your cameras on if you want, folks on Zoom. We have your beautiful faces in front of us. So who wants to go first? Alyssa, do you have somebody who wants to report out from Zoom? Did you guys talk to them?
Nothing the boy was nice enough to volunteer to be our report back person, so I was present her. Yeah, what a daunting task this is. We've had some great conversation. A lot of it centered on remodeling and developing of existing places. It took a particular turn into historic buildings, older buildings that aren't being utilized, that maybe need some additional work, while recognizing that, you know, there's always hidden secrets when you start a project like that. ADUs was seen as a very big bright spot. I think in all of the groups that split out. There was a conversation around the effect that having no public water and wastewater has, and that was referenced in Grand Island County specifically, but certainly we have other places within Franklin County as well. A bright spot also is the bylaw modernization conversation. There was a great deal of conversation around target range for rentals and the HUD limits and what that really means. And how do we understand that if we're trying to solve the problem. As well as understanding best what is the challenge, beyond acknowledging that there is a problem. What is the true need and how can we approach it? Accessibility was focused on as well. We had an individual speak a lot about personal needs and how not every developer or every home or every rental necessarily is conscious of the accessibility needs of so many. Funding, the idea that there's a lot of funding for new housing, but not necessarily enough funding for aging housing and maintaining housing and refurbishing housing. And if there is, there certainly isn't enough understanding of what it is. I already spoke about historic buildings being utilized and the hidden dollars. We talked a lot about the village centers being a great spot and the infill that those village centers are trying to do and the development around that. We talked some about new innovations. Somebody spoke around window dressings and tools and various things that can be done to particular units. And then this is my great spot. I love this. We've talked about this a lot in the core group, but somebody did mention what are the documents that we can create that are part of a toolbox in which we can inform individuals what's available, what the problem is, and approach it from a standpoint of who they are. Are you somebody with a home that has extra space? Are you somebody that has a talent in which you can do some remodeling, but you're not sure what the resources are? You're not sure where the homes might be to do that. So what type of tools can our group create to support individuals that want to make those changes? And then we had Mrs. Gates speak a lot about who our partners are, and she will be sending a list on to Barry regarding various partners that she's worked with, Home Share Vermont, Recycle North, and actually one I hadn't heard of is Greenhouse. I don't understand exactly what they do, but all around aging in place as well. So those were the highlights.
Great, thank you, Kathleen.
All right, Mary's going to report out for us.
And while Barry unmutes, I'll just say one comment thread for me was really around communication and social capacity. So just recognizing that the fact that we're having this conversation here tonight, that you all on Zoom and in the room are here, but also that maybe folks could help be navigators to help folks think about what did ADU work? What did it actually mean? That really person-to-person type communication, I think, was cited as both an opportunity and also just a bright spot around some of the efforts that have been done and where word has gotten out, whether it's on Front Porch Forum or just talking to neighbors. So excited about that capacity that exists both in physical buildings, but also in human beings in these communities. So that's all from us. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear us again? Great.
We can.
Excellent. To the point about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in our workshop that we had a panel of experts, but we also had a woman here in St. Albans City that created 2 accessory dwelling units, 2 apartments and homes, one of which she lives in and rents out the larger portion of the home. And she had some very great stories and great information about the way she did it. And so definitely a learning by example and hearing from people who've been successful at doing these things is really an important way to move forward. So our group, we worked at kind of the 30,000 foot philosophical level and talked about things like is capitalism preventing us from creating homes for everybody that needs one? and that housing is a commodity and not necessarily a right. So we had a discussion about that, and just kind of really getting to the kind of systemic economic changes that are really needed to really tackle this problem. An acknowledgement that there's a lot of moving pieces. There's really no one switch we're going to flip and start creating homes. Everybody has a role in doing it at all different levels, in all sectors, in all walks of life to create homes for people. There was a discussion about looking at the different needs of people in different generations for their housing needs, that people that are single have very different needs than people in growing families and people that are seniors. There was discussion about the fact that seniors used to be able to so-called buy down and buy smaller homes, making larger homes available for growing families. And when I describe this system of the kind of the challenges that we face is, if you just imagine this continuum from people, all the way from people who are homeless and facing housing insecurity, and then the transition to go into homes, and then people who are in small rental units, affordable rental units, wanting to buy a home for the first time, and then people who are in larger homes looking to potentially go to smaller homes. The problem is that right now we're in a situation where everybody is locked in place, and it's a result of a lot of complicated issues, including demand and supply, financing. There's a lot of things that are within our control, but a lot of things that are not within our control. And so when everybody is stuck where they are, nobody moves along that continuum. So that's the way I describe it to a lot of people. So the discussion about the different needs of people in different generations, and how do we accommodate people, the shortage of senior housing opportunities for people that might be able to move into different seniors moving into different places and then freeing up those larger homes. We talked about there being not a lot or little existing funding for revitalization of distressed properties. That there is some, are there opportunities for government or nonprofit organizations to be able to purchase properties and rehabilitate them? There was discussion about subsidized housing rates driving up rental costs, that some of those subsidies are based on formulas for other parts of the state that don't necessarily apply to this region. Back to the seniors living in their home, there was discussion about property tax relief for seniors who are finding it hard to live on a fixed income and having paid into the property tax system for their entire lives and getting some relief. Talk of some short-term rentals. Vermont, an article was cited about Vermont being the most traveled to location. So how are different communities dealing with short-term rentals? Should they be taxed at a much higher rate? As I understand, as a second home, they are taxed at a slightly higher rate in some communities. Should that be higher? The state needs to step up to help with that. Let's see. Back to the larger picture, kind of on a systemic level. Right now, communities need money and support to be able to handle the interrelated problems. This is not just a housing problem. There are people that are experiencing mental health challenges that are in affordable housing, and this is creating complications. So police in some communities are being forced to be dealing with mental health issues that they may not be equipped to deal with. They don't have the capacity to deal with them. So how do we look at this, look at the whole system as interrelated challenges that can be solved rather than kind of in silos? It's a housing problem, it's a mental health challenge, it's a homelessness problem. So looking at it in a more holistic way. Did I miss anything, Emily, that I didn't catch some of the later conversations?
I think we had some conversation about...
You want to come up here and just...
Sure. So other things that I had, and other people can chime in if they want, was there was discussion about commercial properties and that some of those aren't being used now because of work from home, and how we might address those issues, whether there's opportunities for housing, addressing also the loss of property tax value and the effect that that might have on housing property tax, the challenges of infill development, how that can be more complicated and more expensive, the need for cooperative solutions, Trying to think if there's anything else that I had noted. Also, I think it had been brought up that there are a lot of new people moving to Vermont or having second homes in Vermont, and that might increase because of some of the natural disasters and the concept of like climate refugees. I think that was all I had noted down as well.
Sure. So either from Zoom or in the room here, any final thoughts about this discussion you want each other to hear? Did we miss anything? Great, well, I really appreciate both groups' participation. It's kind of fun to do these hybrid meetings where you're like, oh, here we go. So thank you all, and I'm going to hand it to Barry to wrap us up and talk about next steps.
So thank you all for your wisdom, your time, your guidance tonight, sharing your experience with us. We want this to be a process where everybody is involved. Thank you for those that are interested in learning more. We'll add you to our mailing list, invite you to future meetings. Again, the goal here is to listen to what people are saying, what they're experiencing, and share that in our next group of meetings, a group of stakeholder meetings, where we're kind of looking at our goals, we're looking at the work that we're doing now, the work that everybody is doing now, and identifying some priorities and strategies. We want to try new things. We want to try and fail. We want to create some pilot projects, and very open to your ideas about some of those projects. So, and also we want to hear your stories. As I said, the housing needs assessment is data. It tells a certain story. It doesn't tell the full picture. So please get in touch with me to learn more and share your stories. And thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, and we'd love to